Timmy, literally, like last night, I just listened to the podcast that you did the other day, which was great.
With Burley and Hakeem, yeah.
Are already covered there. But as I keep thinking about like what's my role, I just think like there's no question that there's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. And at the same time as that, I think that people are won through hand-to-hand combat and trying to figure out like, like how can I be listening? What does the white church need to be doing to be able to stand up for what Jesus would want, which is justice during this time. So I don't know where this conversation goes, but that's what I want to talk to you guys.
Yeah, that's obviously a broad question, right? What does the church need to be doing at this time? I always say that if I had the answer, I would be on my book tour right now. Right? Like it would be published. I'd be, speaking everywhere. Dexter Pierce to solve racism, right? I'll preface that with no, I don't have any grand claims here.
Yeah.
Many of my ideas are taken from, Black theologians and activists who have been doing this work for much longer than I've been involved. So I kind of take bits and pieces where I can get them. But just to kind of jump on a surface level to answer your question, and Timmy can obviously add whatever context he needs to. But what does the white evangelical church need to be doing? I think it has to start with repentance, right? I think it has to start with this acknowledgement of where you've not even just dropped the ball, but where you've actively contributed to the systems that we have in place today, right? There's a great book that our community that Timmy and I are in have read. It's called Color of Compromise, where Jemar Tisby details the history of the white evangelicals' involvement in justifying slavery, justifying the slave trade, justifying Jim Crow and segregation. The entire political right, the religious right movement formed as a way to oppose integration, right? They only later adopted the issue of abortion because that was socially acceptable, but they formed because they were upset that they were being forced to integrate religious schools. And so the church has to start with understanding of that, repent for their silence, their indifference, their inaction, their conscious action, and then we can go forward. I feel like that's too often missed, and we kind of forget that, no, your hands are bloody in this. There's not equal blame on both sides, right? There was, I hate that, that everyone tries to blame everyone the same amount. No, there's not two equally guilty parties. No. And so when you acknowledge that, then we can build a bridge and go forward. But you have to start there. And so that's a long answer that requires much more, but that's my opening remark.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one too, though. It's like, you see the church and you see it in a lot of different venues, they're beginning to make changes, right? But at the same time, it's not really, I feel like a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I see now, without really acknowledging that you've messed up until now. You know what I mean? And so it's like, when I don't hear that aspect, it doesn't make me confident that they won't just revert back to the way that they were before. And so for example, with the work, we've been talking about it. In our basketball category, we have 7 Black people. When you think about like how much Black culture is involved in basketball, there's 7 and we were talking with our last week we were talking with the head of footwear at Nike, and I told him, and I was basically saying like, I'm a praying man. I pray to God that like, don't let calamity hit for me to run back to or for me to do the right thing. And I basically said like, you guys are just like, we're in a calamity right now, and all of a sudden you're doing the right thing. People have been saying this for decades. We all didn't do anything. And now that you're doing it, a lot of these movements or a lot of these actions that are being taken just seem disingenuous, because it's just like, it's the popular thing to do, or it's out in the open. And so everyone's asking people what they're going to do. And so I think like the church definitely needs to acknowledge that they have been complicit to the issue. Because I think at that point, true repentance moves forward. It's not just like, oh, I got caught. Let me do all these things to make me look good, and then we're going to go back to the way things were before. Like they need to be like, hey, this is something that, whether it be intentional or non-intentional, to the people in the church now, but like they need to acknowledge that, hey, this is a problem. This is something that we contributed to,
Yeah.
how are we going to move forward?
So one thing I've been thinking about a lot, me and a buddy have been kind of talking about this back and forth for probably a year and a half now, is like just the idea of like where our country came from, you know, like we make all this stuff up about like we're the land of the free, the home of the brave. And it's not to say that like we're like, I mean, everybody in America to some degree has it better than a lot of other people in the world. And it's not to say that there's not like some good things that have come from our system of government. But when you actually look at like the facts of America, you know, the fact that we basically like wiped out an indigenous people, stole their land, and then brought over a bunch of people from Africa and enslaved them for 250 years. And that's what our country was founded on. And like, we wonder why the issue of race keeps coming up.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, like I was literally thinking about this, like the house that I bought, like we bought this house like 9 years ago. And I was like thinking about this, like, do I actually own this house? Like the government says I do. But actually like this was probably like some Indians' land that was taken from them at some point. Right. And so like I bought this house like in a way that at some point was unjust, you know, in the way that the land was acquired, or, and like, we have to wrestle with that and think about like, I can't change what happened 200 years ago, right? Or 300 years ago. But the understanding of that, it needs to change the way that I think and act right now. And I think what you said, Dexter, about repentance, for active and kind of inadvertent complicity is like definitely a place to start. I think that's definitely a place to start.
I would add to that. I mean, as part of that, like, there has to be real self-reflection, right? Like, I mean, you made a great point about, look, I bought this house and I'm thinking about what systems brought us to this place today, right? So when the church is looking at how we are, why we're here and how we got here, you know, they need to be asking themselves, why wasn't I listening before, right? I mean, what changed? Why didn't I listen when Trayvon Martin was shot down? Why didn't I listen when Jimmy was shot down, right? Why didn't I listen when Mike Brown was shot down and the country was on fire during Ferguson? Why did I ignore 90+% of the Black community when they told us as white evangelicals not to vote for Trump, right? Why do I ignore Black theologians? And do I turn to people like Jonathan Edwards, you know, who owned slaves and justified slavery? Why do I turn to people like Billy Graham, who was great for evangelicalism, but really, aside from cutting down some ropes, was silent on the Civil Rights Act and refused to get involved in that? So it's, you know, you have to realize, again, what is changing now, and what can I do differently to keep that change going? My biggest concern in all of this is that, Timmy mentioned, it's trendy and it's a fad for companies to get involved, is that if you don't do that work to understand why we're here and what's changing in you, then as soon as it stops being popular, the work is done.
So,
right? And so we need to figure out how to build that momentum.
So, okay, I'm jumping in. Why do you think that the white church hasn't been listening? And I want to preface the white church versus the government. This is for Jesus followers, like people that claim to follow Jesus. Like, why have they not been listening?
Man, there's a great book called Divided by Faith that we also went through in our group that really dives into it better than I can get into it. And it talks about just the idea of white theology, right? And it's so based on the individual and individual salvation, and there's not a focus on systems, right? So they fight racism by being nice to other individual Black people. They don't focus on the systems at place, and their theology doesn't really allow them to acknowledge these broader systems. And so you get things like, it's a heart issue. If we focus on the heart, we can solve these issues, stop making it about something bigger. And so even when they're trying, they often don't have the tools to get there and to fully understand the problem, short of listening to Black preachers and Black theologians and activists and scholars. So I think there's just, why they're listening now, I think it's just because they can't refuse not to listen, right? Like it's everywhere. We had the perfect storm with a virus pandemic, mass unemployment, and then the racial pandemic that exploded, and it's captured our attention. But in order to solve that and move forward, they've got to adjust their toolkit. So,
yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I was talking to some people yesterday, and, you know, with racism, and I know Dexter, you posted something up about it yesterday. you know, how people some often say like racism is just a heart issue. But it's like if you were to look at
Yeah.
if you were to look at child like human trafficking, you know, we could just be like, oh yeah, that's a heart issue. Let's pray for the pimps.
Yeah.
Let's pray for the traffickers.
Yeah. Or
See if they'll
abortion.
get better.
Let's pray for the single moms.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's just like there's a disconnect there. You know what I mean? Like if you said that at the church, people are like, you're ridiculous. We need to fight this thing and save these people. You know? So yeah.
One thing I've thought about, and I don't know how to fully articulate this, so I'm just putting out like a not complete thought. But I've been thinking a lot about just the idea of systemic racism and why it's such a sensitive issue for white people. And like, I mean, and maybe this just goes to like white fragility, but thinking about like, there seems to be when like a white person hears the word systemic racism, what they think is, well, I'm not a racist, so therefore, you know, and I know that like my friend who's a cop is not a racist, and so because of that, you're telling me that I am a racist. And I think that I've just been trying to think about that like, I mean, I don't know whether that makes you a racist or not, but I think that there are a lot of people that are making themselves feel personally attacked when the issue of systemic racism is brought up. And I think that like to some degree, we probably should feel personally attacked if we've been complicit in this. Like, you know, we probably should. But I think that in our culture, we're not very good at taking personal responsibility and taking criticism. Anyway, I don't know where that's going, but I guess just thinking about that idea of, I think that the default reaction is, well, I'm not a racist. So, and I know that like my friend that's a cop isn't a racist. So therefore systemic racism is not a thing. And Timmy, when you were talking on the podcast, like you had such a good point about your wife where like, she's had this experience with pregnancy that you've never had. And so for you just to be like, well, hey, well, let me tell you about pregnancy. Like,
yeah.
What, are you kidding me? Like,
well, there's another example, man. Like, you know, before I dated my wife, you know, it's like I was very ignorant to a lot of the things that this is like to what women legitimately went through. You know what I mean? Like, you know, you hear the locker room talk in the locker rooms. You know what I mean? Like, I might not necessarily like contribute to. I might not be saying anything, but I'm laughing at the jokes.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm chanting these lyrics during a party. You know what I mean? You know, I'm encouraging these bad views that essentially objectify women. You know, and when I met my wife and I started to get to know her a lot better, I was like, holy cow! Like, I have contributed to this.
Yeah.
A lot. You know what I mean? Like, inappropriate jokes. That's what she said. Pause. All this kind of stuff. Like, I was doing all that kind of stuff, and I was just like, oh snap! Like, and then finding out that like my wife went through a bad situation. Next thing you know, I'm like, holy cow! Like, I can't be a part of this whatsoever. I need to distance myself from this. You know what I mean? Like, and I just think like it's a humbling feeling to know that you might have played a role in the harm of somebody else.
Yeah.
You know? And so I don't know.
Yeah.
You just gotta I think it's so hard to admonish one another today.
Yeah.
Timmy, that brings up a good point. I mean, like you talk about growth, right? Like you held these views and you were able to then reevaluate it. I look back at myself, 10 years ago, even, 15 years ago, and I had a lot of things to unpack, and forgive the toddler, climbing behind me. Only so much. I had a lot of things to unpack and decolonizing of my mind and my faith and my theology. I had a lot of problematic views. So that allows me to have some grace for people as they're trying to go through this and go on their journey. But at the same time, like I need to see action that you're trying to go on this journey, right? Like you can stumble, I'll stumble on the journey with you. But you need to show me you want to take that, you want to go on that journey.
Absolutely.
And that's why I've been so frustrated, because people haven't even acknowledged that there's a need for the journey to begin with. And there's so much evidence out there now. You shouldn't need your Black friend to tell you this is a real issue anymore, right? Like you can turn on the TV, you can jump on any website.
Yeah.
You can go on mainstream news, or you can go on the alt-right website. Even they're talking about it from a different lens, of course, but everyone's acknowledging this. So I need people to be invested in the journey now. We'll crawl through it together, but I need you to be invested.
Yeah. So I think about this a lot. Like, I maybe it was you that said it, Dexter. I don't know who it was. No, it wasn't you. It was it was one of the recent Pass the Mic podcasts where they were talking about it was, the title of it was something to the effect of like our nation's on a breaking point. It was one of their recent episodes, and they were talking about how like people have come out of the woodwork to say, hey, don't riot, don't break things, like all this, peacefully protest. And one of the things that the host brought up is he's like, these people aren't listening to you. Like you saying like, don't riot, they do not care what you have to say, because the church has lost the authority of being a moral standing ground. You've lost that authority. And so it doesn't help to run your mouth about what people should and shouldn't do. I think that that's really important to understand. I think for someone like, so for me, like, I was born and raised in Corvallis. Like Timmy, you're obviously real familiar with Corvallis. And I just know for me growing up, like I grew up in a, conservative Christian family, and like good people, loved Jesus, like went to a school that was like, almost 100% white, like probably 3 Black people in a school of like 1,100, like just very, very few. And so like, I kind of came out with just these ideas of like, of what life was like. And I had this like, I kind of lived like an idiot for a while, but I was kind of raised in this like conservative, political, evangelical Christian faith. And like, not all that's bad. But what is bad is kind of looking critically at like what the scriptures say versus how the evangelical church has like played things out in America, of basically like jumping in bed with the Republican Party. And that, like, I think that's idolatry that has to be just called out. And it doesn't matter if you're a conservative, like it's still idolatry to like, to jump in bed and to see like just this like wickedness being done in the name of Jesus. And I think about like, I think for me about like, what's the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, right? Because like, I kind of like, I'm kind of in the middle. Like I'm registered as an independent, and I've got like plenty of critiques for the left, but I've got way more for the right because they claim the name of Jesus, and I'm like, dude, like it's like I can't even like describe how sick it makes me feel.
It's
and I
so
feel
frustrating.
like the church has to be blatant in calling that out. And we've been so,
absolutely.
Yeah, sorry, I'll let you take it from there.
No, man, I think absolutely, man. It's crazy how much. So like, for example, this chick Candace Owens, man, like she grinds my gears so much. And one thing that I've been getting a lot is, because I posted up a few things. I posted up one video, and they're like, it was like the Young Turks far left group, and they're like, she's a piece of garbage. They're saying all this stuff about her. No one's actually a piece of garbage, but as far as my concern for her, Jesus loves her, and it ends about there. But like, it's been crazy how much I get chastised by people at church through messages about my critique on her, right? And it's always like, hey, I have a friendly reminder, right? But someone's like, yeah, she says she loves Jesus, and you might see her in heaven one day. This is what someone actually said. You might see her in heaven one day. You're posting up these things, they're calling a piece of garbage. Maybe you should treat her better, think about her in a different light. And I'm like, hey, okay, I'm going to see her in heaven one day, and I'm still going to ask her, what's the deal? You know what I mean? Like, when I'm up there. And then 2, it's like, I don't know, man, like people would go to church on Sunday and lynch a dude and celebrate after service back in the day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they claim that Jesus is Lord.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you have to take that, unfortunately, today with a grain of salt. but I don't know. I think in today's society, people serve their political party first.
Yeah.
That's the basis of their faith. You know what I mean? It's like and so like when I've been talking about racism and stuff, obviously there's the systemic issues and it dives deep into politics, but like even when we're in the podcast, we're talking about Black Lives Matter. I'm like, hey, let's take politics off the board. And as a church, it's important to make sure that you do not try to align with one or the other. Personally, I don't know, but like, but I don't know. I just think that so many people, like, and I don't want to just say like the right, but if you look at it, man, it's just like it's really weird. Some people have this disillusionment calling Donald Trump a Christian, and it's like he's objectively shown that he's not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like he's never claimed that he was.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, oh yeah, he's a Christian. Oh yeah, he's this, and it's just like I just don't get it. It's just so weird. It's so weird.
Yeah, the love affair between, and I won't even say that the Christian church, because we're talking about the subset of white evangelicals.
Yep.
Right? The love affair between white evangelicals at large and the Republican Party is almost unexplainable until you look at the role of racism, right? Like that's the connection that makes it in. It explains it. Right? It doesn't make it right.
Can you talk more about that?
Now it makes sense why. Yeah, so I mean, and I kind of alluded to it earlier with the rise of the religious right? Like it stemmed from this anti-integration position, right? They did not want integration. I think the school is Bob Jones University, which basically they prohibited interracial relationships on campus, and I think interracial housing on the dorms. And their tax exemption status was threatened, right? Like federal law has changed. We've now outlawed this. If you want to continue to be at, tax exempt status, you need to change this. They took it to court. They fought back. They got all of the religious right on. I mean, that's what drummed up the support for the religious right, right? They did not want to be told that they needed to integrate. And they made the same arguments then about what their faith dictated as conscience as you see them making today about other issues in marriage and everything else. So, they've kind of taken this issue that started as how do we oppose integration and use that with everything else they've done, right? And so even going back before that, when you look at the role the church played in justifying whether a state was going to be a free state or a slave state, right? One minister, I want to say his name is George. I can't think of his full name now, but he was anti-slavery until he realized that he wanted to start an adoption agency and a foster home, and he needed a way to support the foster home. And he's like, well, slaves are cheap labor. So then he began lobbying the state legislature to make the state a slave state, and succeeded, right? So this was led by a Christian movement to literally take a state that was supposed to be a free state and turn it into a slave state. And so you kind of see that going throughout history over and over and over again. And then what you do is you get people on board with these general ideas, and you paint yourself as the Christian and religious party, and they don't have to think about anything else that goes into it, right? Yeah. So, I mean, one thing to talk about is just definitions of racism. I mean, you alluded to this earlier, Tim, about how people get offended and they take it personal when you talk about racism or racist, right? Because I'm a good person, or that cop I know is a good person, and they fail to see systems. But if racism just means, you believe you're superior to someone else, okay, you're probably not racist. But if we look at racism in a way, and Ibram Kendi talks about this, as ideas and policies that are upholding and supporting racial inequality and creating racial inequality, it's a much broader definition, and that's more useful. One example I'll give is when you talk about like just voter ID laws, right? Like whatever you think about voter fraud or whatnot, voter ID laws have the clear impact of disenfranchising Black people, young people, and poor people, right? So even if you think there's massive fraud going on, what you're saying is that fraud, in order to get rid of it, I'm okay with a third of Black people not being able to vote. So taking aside your intentions, your good heart, whatever, supporting voter ID laws is disenfranchising a third of Black people. That's a racist effect. So no matter how you want to put that, you're furthering racism, right? So if you can't acknowledge that, and you fail to see that, and you think racism means I have to have a bad heart and bad intent, we're never going to get around that. And maybe you do think voter fraud is an issue. You're not going to be able to create a more tailored solution to address these issues without harming an entire group of people. And for the most part, I mean, you see that all throughout a lot of conservative policies. And, yeah, Democrats have problems, right? Everyone needs to say that. We have the false equivalency. But the Black church has been able to navigate this issue quite well for a long time. And they've dealt with this. So.
Well, and I even think about like, I mean, I have a real good friend that's Catholic, and we were just talking like the Catholic Church has plenty of issues that they have to work through, but one thing they do a good job of is like they have a doctrine that they believe regardless of a political party. So you'll see like Pope Francis will come out and say something that is like very left leaning in regards to the way that we need to treat immigrants and the orphan, the poor, and the widow, and then he'll come out with something that is right leaning about his stance on abortion. And I think that that's something that white evangelicals need to take a look at, is like, what do we actually believe is true? And then look objectively. And like, at the end of the day, we do have two political parties. So like, there are decisions you have to make in the way that you vote. And I understand that, but like to just like jump in bed or just to choose to check all the boxes on one side because you agree on one issue. Like, so, okay, I remember this is like 10 years ago. And I remember it was the election. It was one of the Obama elections. And I remember for me, in one of the Obama elections, I voted for Obama, and in one of the ones I didn't. And this is the election where I did vote for him. I think I voted for him the second time. Anyway, my boss at the time, like staunch Republican, claimed to have to follow Jesus to some degree. And he just like couldn't believe that I would vote for a Democrat. He just couldn't believe it. And he looked at me and he said, "Tim, this comes down to one issue, abortion. You understand that, right? This comes down to one issue." And I just said, "No, it doesn't. Like, it doesn't come down to one issue. It comes down to a lot of issues. And like, even if we vote for Republican, are they going to make abortion illegal? Like, no." And he goes, "No." He goes, "No, but we're giving up ground. And if we vote in a Republican, they won't give up any more ground that we've lost." And like, I've come a long way since that conversation. But even 10 years ago, I was like, that is like not the way to look at any situation. I mean,
you know what it is that a lot of people look to politics for salvation. You know what I mean? People are like, "Oh, if we hire this leader, then we'll be saved. This is how we're going to fix it, is if because of Trump, there's going to be no more abortion." You know, and that's just not realistic. I remember a dude, it was a text. He's like, "Hey," he's like, "Do you think someone can," it was a group text, and he's like, "Hey, do you think someone could be a Christian and not be Republican?" And I was like, "Yes." You know what I mean? And they just kept going back to abortion. I'm like, "Look," and I just kind of broke it down. I'm like, "Yo, you're like, obviously it's a very gray, I personally think it's kind of gray, but like, there's just so many issues regarding that, where you look at, if you were to outlaw abortions, people are still going to get abortions. You know what I mean? And it's just like, now you're going to have these moms who are trying to get it done in shady ways. They might be at risk. And I just feel like there's a lot of things that you have to look at in regards to that. But I don't know. I just feel like people just look to these politicians too much to save them.
Yeah.
So, okay, I want to get really practical, and I guess I'm speaking for myself here. Like, I would guess, so like the people that are going to see, I mean, I don't know who's going to see this conversation, but like, I would imagine as I share this with friends and with whoever sees it, I think that there's a lot of people right now that are starting to think like, yeah, I do want to do something about this. Like, this is a big deal. And maybe it's something they've been thinking about for a number of years. Maybe this is brand new to them. So what do you think, I should do? What do you think someone like me that's like a white, relatively wealthy person with immense privilege and frankly, like not that many Black friends, like what should I do?
You want to take this, Timmy? I'll follow you.
Okay, man, I was like, I think with technology today, you can find events that are happening in the Black community and be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Portland's not that far away. You know, you can join those events, you can talk to those people. You just got to make the effort to, you know. And I don't know. I just think that's kind of what it is. Like, get yourself educated, but just don't educate yourself. You know, be proactive in trying to have a relationship with people of color. You know, I think that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I can't stress the education point enough, right? But education shouldn't be the goal. It shouldn't be the end goal, right? So, I mean, I think there are a number of resources to go out and start building that awareness. I mean, you're farther along than some, but obviously still behind others, right? And so, I mean, on my list of, I'll recommend and pass the mic as Black Christian voices who are doing this work and trying to put this on the church's radar. A great source there. We've talked about some books, you know, Color of Compromise. Another one I recommend is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, White Fragility. You know, read, but if you don't read, you know, there's the movie, The 13th, the documentary, Just Mercy, that is based off a true story. James Baldwin's I'm Not Your Negro. So there's books, there's movies, there's podcasts. People can find the medium that works for them and then educate themselves, right? And if you have close friends and you have actual relationships that you've already built up credibility, have those conversations, right? If they're open to it. I don't encourage you to just go find Black people and ask them questions.
Yeah.
Because odds are you're not the only person, right? Like just this past 2 weeks at my job, I've had over a dozen people call me who work with me, and some of it's well-meaning, right? They want to check in. How's Dexter doing? White people who, you know, they want to know what they can do next. I appreciate that, but I don't have time for that. Like, I'm still trying to process everything that's going on. I'm still trying to process the latest.
It can be
Black
overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have that emotional labor, and we don't have the relationship for you to be entitled to my time, right? Like, I've literally had people now start sending me gift cards to thank me for my time because it's real work. You know, hey, white guilt is dumb.
That'd be nice.
I'm not asking to send me money, but truly support Black people that are doing this work. Like, not me, but actual activists. You know, sign up for the Patreon accounts.
Yeah.
You know, send them monies. You know, buy their books, right? So that's the education front. But then, as you learn, like, what do you do next? Identify what systems are furthering racial inequality and think about how you can dismantle those. How can you tear those down? Much of that work's already been done, right? It's been done by authors like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Michelle Alexander, and highlighting steps you can take, right? So listen to those voices, learn from them. But think about, why did I vote in favor of the latest ballot measure to increase police funding, right? Why did I support that? You know, why am I advocating at my children's school that they incorporate and teach real Black history, or are they just learning about MLK, right? You know, you can't, you have to see color. You can't try to solve racially created problems with racially neutral solutions. Like, it won't happen. You have to see color. And so those are just steps, right? I would break that down into, you know, read or get educated, you know, support Black businesses, support Black activists, and then reach out to actual white systems and try to dismantle them or interrupt them.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the three things I would suggest for white people, what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny you mentioned, you were talking about the Pass the Mic podcast, and so for me, I feel like this has been a journey I've been really processing a lot over probably the last 4 years. Like, I guess it would have been probably when this started, I guess for both of you guys, was when we were doing the Imago basketball ministry 7 years ago. And for me, like, I mean, to be honest, like, that was one of the first times I'd ever truly been around a lot of Black people, like where I was outnumbered, right? You know, and like, I play a lot of basketball, so I'd go to, like, you know, Fremont Park and stuff like that and play, and, you know, there wouldn't always be a ton of white people, but there was usually more white people than Black people. And that was, I mean, to be honest, like, that was just my first time, like, ever getting any sense of, like, what Black culture was like. And so since then, I've been really sensitive to trying to think about, like, what have I been blind to? What have I been like either complicit in or actively a part of that is wrong, you know? And so I give that preface to say that this has been an issue that's been on my mind for a number of years. And when I listened to this this latest Pass the Mic podcast, like, I felt, as soon as they started talking, they're like, hey, you know what? If you're white, like, we're glad you're here, but, like, this is a conversation for the Black church. and we're not going to apologize for that. So like, here we go. And I was like, what? Like in my head, I'm like, man, like that's kind of harsh. Like you're saying like I shouldn't be here, you know? And I had to stop and think like, cause where I want to go is I never start a conversation like, hey, this is for the white church. If you're black, like, hey, glad you're here. But like, but this is the arrogance of like, these are two totally different contexts and totally different situations. So like if I had okay, so like I'm a huge nerd for like the book of Revelation. And I do not believe for a second the common American interpretation of the book. And actually that's been a book for me that has fueled this fire of like, how do I live? Because I think, anyway, but I can go down a whole rabbit hole with this. So with that, so my view on Revelation is like, I don't think it's that controversial, but like, it's not the American evangelical interpretation. And so if I'm going to do a podcast or have a conversation about this, I can totally see myself saying, hey, like, this is a conversation about this point of view. Now, if you don't have this point of view, like, glad you're here, but like, this is what we're talking. It just realized like the arrogance on my part to kind of be like, what are you talking about? Like, I can't be here because in my head, I want to be a part of everything because like, hey, I'm not a racist and like, I'm not a part of these systems. So like, I can just be part of this too, just the same as you guys. And the truth is like, I can't in that same way. You know, it doesn't mean that we don't follow Jesus and that but like, there are things that like, we just need to respect differences about each other in ways that, I don't know. That was my experience for what that's worth.
No, that's such a great point. And it highlights, right, that there's this assumption that white culture is the norm.
Yes.
Right? So as Black people,
normalized.
Hold on. And that's the reason I don't say, hey, this is for the white people here. If you're Black, like glad it's because like it's the norm.
Yeah. So I step into these rooms or into these sermons, and you don't have to say it, but I know that's what you're talking about, right? Like you've ignored everything that's happened in the Black community and issues that the Black community is facing, and you're just going to talk about issues that are important to white community. So you don't preface it, but it's known, right? And that I would be remiss if I did not mention this here, though. That also includes we have to recognize that Black women have a unique voice in these conversations as well.
Oh yeah,
right?
for sure.
And so often they are overlooked, right? I mean, you think the civil rights movement, we talk about Rosa Parks, but then it's really MLK and Malcolm X. You ignore Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker. You know, Coretta Scott King. We ignore these voices. We're doing it again, and Black men are guilty of this. We're doing it again with Black Lives Matter because we highlight Mike Brown and George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor becomes a footnote, even though her killer cops are still not arrested, right? And so, and this is, I mean, the silencing of women in church is its own thing, but the silencing of Black women is so much more compound, and those voices we need to be listening to, right? One last example I'll give on this point is, you know, police kill unarmed Black people at 3 times the rate of unarmed white people, right? That's statistics, that's facts. That's a problem. We all recognize that. But Black women are 3 times more likely than white women to die during childbirth, regardless of money, regardless of class. Beyonce, Serena Williams almost died during childbirth because doctors have a tendency to ignore Black pain and to write off and dismiss Black women, in addition to all of the Black trauma and stress that comes with just racism they bring to the table to begin with. So if we really cared about Black women, that would be as important to the conversation as the conversation is about policing right now. And so I realize we're a panel of all men. You know, here we are, it's Black men and white men. We can't acknowledge the role of diversity and the role these voices play without calling out our failure, you know, to include those voices as well. So.
That's
So I wanted to bring this up because this actually just happened to me literally earlier today. I was having a conversation about racism with a neighbor of mine, and we were talking about Black Lives Matter, and he was bringing up like the looting and the rioting, and he was kind of saying like, hey, I'm all for protests, but like there's a right way to do it, there's a wrong way to do it. And this guy follows Jesus, and I just said, hey, like I get it, but the text that I always go back to, Dexter, me and you have talked about this before, is like I always go back to the text in Matthew 6 when Jesus is talking about divorce, and he talks about how like he says you've heard it said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce, but I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for marital unfaithfulness causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. So this is a case where Jesus says, yes, adultery is a sin, but he puts the blame for that sin on the man's shoulders because you caused her to become an adulteress.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important to realize. And I was telling my neighbor, I was like, we have to realize, like, we can think what we want about whether it's right or wrong. But who would Jesus hold that? Who would he hold accountable for that sin? That text should really make us think about that. It should really make us think about the people that are in power, the people with privilege, their sin that they'll be held accountable for. And I think that that's really important to talk about right now in light of the things that are happening. And also makes you think, I was telling him this, like, it also makes you think about, like, how long have people been crying out? How long have they been crying out, trying to peacefully protest? And now what it's showing is, like, they've got nothing left. Like what else are we going to do?
What else do you expect people to do?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so the thing that he brought up too, this is, I guess I want to bring all this to you guys to hear you comment on it. He was talking about, like, Black Lives Matter and, hey, I'm fine with peaceful protests, but, like, there was, like, some of the people at the beginning of Black Lives Matter were really violent, and they actually went to mosques to learn terrorist techniques from different people in mosques. And, like, I mean, it's so hard for me. Like, I didn't go down the rabbit hole. I just felt like it wasn't, like, the time or place to, but I just, like, in my head, I'm thinking, like, okay, number one, I don't think that's true, but, like, if it was true, where was the church? Like, why isn't the church the one speaking up saying Black Lives Matter so that we don't have to have people that are learning terrorist techniques from, like, the point is, like, it's this the whole thing of, like, if the church doesn't have a spot for people to rally to, what do we expect? Like, they're going to go where they feel like there's the most truth. And if there's the most truth, like, outside of the walls of the church, like, that's where they're going to go. And you may not like where it ends up because you got people that are a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's a great point. Yeah. The church failed to step up. The church left or created a vacuum, however you choose to look at it, and that vacuum had to be filled, right? Mm-hmm. And that vacuum's been there for quite some time. And so, yeah, the whole going to mosque and receiving terrorist training, don't know anything about that. I'm not going to waste my time diving down that rabbit hole. I would just say, where's the evidence of this terrorist activity that's happening, right? Either they got terrible training, or they're playing an extremely long game, and they have done nothing in the 6 to 8 years.
Well, and I mean, and there's so many assumptions there about, like, that everybody in a mosque is like a terrorist waiting to train everyone. Like,
yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem in itself, huh?
Oh my goodness! I mean, one of the founders, Patrisse Cullors, is an ordained minister, right, in the Christian church, and so, I mean, clearly she's not going to be accepted in white evangelical Christian churches, but, like, Jesus has always played a huge role in the Black civil rights movement, and it takes a back seat because it doesn't align with, mainstream white American Christian ideas of what it looks like. But Jesus has always been centered. I mean, Brie Larson, who climbed up and grabbed the flagpole in South Carolina, grabbed the Confederate flag. I mean, she's very outspoken about her faith. That was a planned event. Like, Jesus motivates you to seek out and remedy injustice. The question for me is, what is white Jesus teaching y'all, right? Like, I mean, how y'all following this man that's just quiet and for the status quo? But it causes them to create this alternative, heresy, right? The Black church and liberation theology are all heretics. And that itself, is problematic, but.
Yeah. I honestly think that one of the reasons why the church didn't step up is because they're afraid to lose members. Honestly, because it's like, you look at any type of political issue, like, it's like, recent times, I feel like our church has stepped up a little bit, with some of the stuff that Trump has said, and that it's objectively wrong, whether it be like, but it's just like, there's times where they have a time to step up and they can really speak on things, but they don't, because they don't want to upset too many people. And you could say that about the American church in general. It's just like, they just kind of like making people feel comfortable. You know what I mean? It's like, how many sermons do you have that really call people out? You know what I mean?
Great
That
point.
say like, this is wrong. Like, you should not be doing this.
Yeah.
This is a trend that's happening in this church. You all shouldn't be doing this. You just don't get that. And it's just saying like, yeah, it's okay. It's always trying to make sure that people leave the doors feeling great.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you talk about race, as soon as you talk about any of that, people just get bogged down by it. And so they just stay away from it.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's refreshing that people are starting to step up, but at the same time, it's like this Stevie Wonder song, like Visions in My Mind. It's like, have I lived to see the milk and honey land? Is hate a dream? Or does love forever stand? It's just like, are these just visions in my mind that these things are happening? You know what I mean? Is this actually a reality that the church is really stepping into, or where will they end up?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I've wondered that a lot. Like, and I'd just be curious of your guys' perspectives, like going to a largely white church. You know, I think that we've been super guilty of like not calling things for what they are in the past. And I was so stoked to see that message that Dom had the other day on YouTube, just like calling out racism and like the fact that Westside has had like a prayer walk about this. And, you know, to me, that's awesome. But thinking about, I guess, so I'm going to give a long question to give some context, and I'd love to hear your guys' answers. So like, so going to a largely white church, I was thinking about this, like, and you think about even like being a woman going to an evangelical church, like if you're taught by a man your entire life and you're a woman, well, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it actually means that there's like not a person that's actually in your exact context that is like speaking to you. And to me, it seems like it'd be really weird if all of a sudden if I was only taught by women, if I was never taught by a man, it would just be a weird dynamic where I just have to think and filter just different. It'd just be different. And for me, like what's normal is I'm used to like having a white man speak at church on Sundays. And like, what has that experience been like for you guys?
Man, like, I don't know. I just wonder why. You look at our church, and I love our church, but it's like, it's so interesting how like we do collaborations with so many other churches around the area, but it's like rarely do we bring someone who's a person of color, you know? And like, why is that? You know, is it because they don't have the relationships with them or whatever? You know what I mean? It's just like, why is there no diversity in the pastoral group or in the eldership? You know, and it's like, is that a priority? And that's just a question you have to ask them, right? And so it's like, is that something that they really find important? And so, and if it's not, then tell us why.
Yeah, I think that was a great question, Timmy. And I would say, I mean, they force you to ask those questions, and I would say for me, they've already answered those questions for me, right? These aren't priorities for you. These are not issues that you've been concerned about. And you know, we've been at the church for, you know, I've been in the church for about 10 years. Timmy's been there, you know, about as long, if not longer.
8 years, about 8 years, yeah.
Yeah, and so they're trying, right? Like, I mean, I can certainly say where they're at now is miles away from where they were at beginning, but it's still, you know, it's still such baby steps, right? Like, I mean, a YouTube video saying that racism is wrong, I mean, that should have been something that could have gone out, you know, in 2001, right? Or 1990, when you had the whole racial reconciliation movement going on in the, you know, Southern Baptist movement. So the fact that it took this long to get there, I applaud the step, but it also has to have context, right? Like, we can't pat ourselves in the back too hard, you know, for those steps, right? So it's always finding that tension. But for me, I noticed, well, we haven't gone to service in a while with Corona, but I walk in and I expect I'm going to be leaving with a significant hole when I leave service, right? Like, yes, they may talk about these things. I may get a great theme-based sermon. We may dive into some scripture here, but in terms of what that means as a Black man in America, as a Black Christian in America, what that means in my demographic, it's not going to come up. And I go in with that expectation, and almost always, you know, I leave with my expectations met, right? I mean, they're not going to exceed those. And that can be difficult, particularly as things in the world continue to accumulate, and, you know, one name after another. I think back to 2016, And you had Alton Sterling shot in Louisiana, and then you had Philando Castile, who was shot the same week. I want to say it was 2 or 3 days later, and I realized, I remember that because I was studying for the bar, the bar exam, trying to process what I need to study to prepare for the largest exam of my life, and also trying to mourn these Black men who I've just witnessed die on TV. But I go to church on Sunday in silence. I go to church the next Sunday, silence.
You were still in Raleigh, right?
Say again?
You were in Raleigh during that time?
No, I was here in Portland. I was studying for the bar here. I was going to West Side. And then I think maybe a week or two later, you had the 5 Dallas police officers who were, oh, no, you're fine. And now the church wants to speak out, right? Like we had 5 police officers out. So now we got to speak out and we got to say something. And it tells me what your priorities are. It tells me what's on your radar. And not that it's bad to acknowledge the death of 5 police officers, right? Like people are going to mourn for them regardless, right? You don't need a Blue Lives Matter campaign because everyone thinks they matter to begin with. But when you ignore the death that led to that event, it hurts so much more, right? Than just staying silent throughout all of it, right? Like that's just insult to injury. And that's what it means to be at a predominantly white church. I mean, can they get better? I think they can get marginally better. But unless they're going to cede leadership and bring in Black voices and allow them to be authentic Black voices, as opposed to just tokens who follow white ministry, I don't know if there's a lot of hope for improvement on that front. Maybe they can address the issues better and tend to white flock and get white people interested in these issues, but I don't know if they can provide a meaningful service to Black Christians at large going forward with the current structure they have in place.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting that we live in a country where things are in a certain position where, just saying that racism is wrong seems like a good step. You know what I mean? It's just like, why is that's like saying black is black and white is white, like no pun intended, but it's just like, it's such a objective truth in this world that racism is wrong. Why does it take so long for people to actually say that?
Yeah.
Why is it, and this is, and like some of it's sort of the systemic issues, right? When like Ben and Jerry says we are going to oppose white supremacy, and a bunch of people are saying we're going to boycott the ice cream brand now. Like, hold up, like y'all have a problem? Y'all don't think white supremacy is bad? Like, you have to really dig deep into why that is. You know what I mean? And I don't know everyone at the church, but there's some people who might have been mad because Dom said that racism was bad. You know what I mean?
Oh, I mean, I looked at the comments on the YouTube video, and like there were people that were like, "Oh, well, did you know this, and this?" And like, I think you're making it,
It's like, why is that a problem? Like, it's when you look at it very objectively, it's like, yeah, it's true. Call a spade a spade. Like, racism is bad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I
Timmy,
think
you brought this up. Oh,
no, you for it. Go for it.
Timmy, you brought this up on your last podcast about the need for people to start trudging through victims' past, right? So when a pastor comes out and says, Black Lives Matter, the immediate response from the expected crowd is, why are you saying that now? Don't you know George Floyd was arrested once? So they pull the Candace Owens line. And they do that for every Black victim, right? It doesn't matter how educated, how stand-up they are. Like, one, that shouldn't matter at all. But they're going to find something. And as if that devalues the message and devalues the Black life to begin with. And so, yeah, when you talk about the comments Dom's received, like, I don't understand this need for people to push back and be like, well, this isn't a worthy enough cause.
It's because we work. I think it's because we worship comfort and we worship ourselves. I really do. I mean,
yeah.
I think like, I think it's true as a society, but like it's especially true as a church. Like we worship our own comfort, and I feel like, I mean, and I just thinking about this. Like, so take my situation with my house, for instance, right? So like, I'm in this house like that is, like the land it sits on is like covered in blood, and what should I do about it? Those are like uncomfortable questions, and I don't know, like I got to figure it out. And I think that when we worship comfort, anything to disrupt that comfort is the enemy. And when we make our faith so like for me personally, like I think one of the most dangerous theologies in the world is let go and let God.
Oh.
And I think that as like a white evangelical church, we are so terrified of works because, I'm not saved by works. I'm saved by grace. And I'm just this like dirty old sinner anyway. So, you know, and we totally like undercut the fact that Jesus never taught that way. Jesus seemed to really care about what his disciples did. You read the scriptures and like, we really are supposed to do something. And if we have been given the Holy Spirit, like that actually equips us to do the work of Jesus in the world. And like, you know, I've heard it said that as evangelicals, we read 1 Corinthians 12, and when Paul says you're the body of Christ, and we think like, yeah, we're like the body of Christ, but Paul says you are the body of Christ. So like if Jesus is going to do something, if he's the head, how is it going to happen? It's going to happen with the church. And we have to get comfortable with the fact that like, yeah, we're saved by grace for a purpose. And it's like the fruit of fulfilling that purpose that honestly reveals like whether we're actually saved, quote unquote, or like follow Jesus to begin with, you know? And I think that when we worship, if we have a theology that says, I don't need to do anything, that makes me, I can just let life happen. Like I can just do my thing. Hey, I just work my job. Like, yeah, I pay my taxes and I donate to this cause. And like, you know what? I'm just like holding on. Like I'm just holding on until heaven.
Well,
And
like,
sorry, go for it.
No, I was going to say is like the Bible speaks directly against that type of thinking. You know, look at the parable of the talents. You had a guy who the master gave a talent to, and he's like, I'm gonna just bury it. And because of that, master's like, you're out, you're done. Cast out where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. You know what I mean? Like, you know, the Lord says it's like, you know, if you see the good that you're supposed to do and you don't do it, you're in the wrong. You know, and so it's just like I just feel like it's interesting. I honestly feel like if Jesus were to come down to this earth right now, I feel like a lot of people would not only dislike him, a lot of people would hate him.
Yeah.
Who claim
he would be detained at the border.
Yeah. People would hate him. I honestly feel like a lot of people would just despise what he's all about. Because he'd be calling all of us out.
Well, dude, so like I get in trouble sometimes when I teach. I always give the preface of saying that if Jesus were here today, as I would say, the only thing that could bring the Republicans and Democrats together is that they both want to kill Jesus, but the Republicans would do it first. I mean,
hey, you said it.
It's interesting. Obviously, on a much smaller level, right? Like Dr. King is not Jesus. I'm not committing heresy here, but you see the same thing with him, right? Like Dr. King was one of the most hated men in his life. You know, right after he died, I think like 70% of America hated him. And if we're honest, I mean, a good portion of Black people hated him as well, right? I mean, for a lot of reasons, for propaganda reasons, because they didn't think he was radical enough. But he was one of the most hated men in this country. And now he is used as the primary weapon by white conservatives to silence and fight against Black lives, right? He is the man who's brought out of context, misquoted to, and not just condemn rioting and looting, because obviously
literally today in this conversation I had, it was, man, if Martin Luther King Jr. if he could just see what was happening today, what would he say? And I was like, yeah, what would he say?
Yeah, he would be condemning endless war. He'd be condemning the Iraq war. He would not, you know, all these things like that's, you know, yeah, he'd be advocating for economic justice, universal basic income, right? Like things that he was accused of being a communist before. And it's just ridiculous that you can think anything about Dr. King and what he fought for and what he was murdered for, right? He didn't just die passively; he was assassinated.
Yeah,
and still be like, the response to injustice is what we need to focus on. He'd be upset about that. No, he gave his life. His life was stolen from him to fight for Black lives and Black rights. He would not be overly concerned about the riots when these issues are still going on, right?
Yeah.
Like when Black people are still being stripped of the vote, you know, systematically. It blows my mind. But yeah, it is what it is.
You know, it's funny. You know what I mean? You look at today, and you look at people who really fought for civil rights back in the day. You look at people like MLK, and even Muhammad Ali, and even Malcolm X, to some extent, where people now celebrate those guys. You know what I mean? Muhammad Ali is clearly like, he is loved globally. And when he died, a lot of people mourned. And I actually wonder of some of those people, I'm like, you probably didn't like him back in the day. You probably thought he talked too much. You probably thought this. It's interesting because like there's no social media back then. they weren't able to post that stuff. But I think about it now, we're going through all this stuff now, right? You know, you had Colin Kaepernick peacefully protesting. People said the worst things about that man. In the future,
the irony of seeing Goodell change his stance on that is like,
oh, I just think that's insane. I think that's ridiculous. The thing that's funny too is the fact that he did it. Most of the owners didn't really say anything. He is like their scapegoat, right? It's like, hey, Goodell said it, so we're all good. But you know, all these people saying these awful things about Colin Kaepernick. You know, and you already see that he's starting to become celebrated for what he was doing.
Yeah.
Right? I wonder what it's going to be like 50 years from now.
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, we have to ask those questions. Dexter, you've talked about this a lot on Facebook. Like, you know, if you were living in like the 1950s and 60s, what are people going to remember about the way that you acted at the time, about who you voted for, about what you said on Facebook? Like, we have to think about that a lot. Like, I mean, it's.
I can't wait.
So okay. So I got this. I want to respect your guys' time too. So I'm almost done here. But I got
all
this.
sorts of stuff.
I've got this book of theology from John Wesley from the 1700s, and it's just unreal. But there's a letter in it from this is like 1750, maybe 1760, and it's a letter from Wesley to William Wilberforce. And Wesley's in the colonies, and Wilberforce is in England. And Wesley's writing to him, commending his work and just saying, you know, what you're doing is like, we're hearing about it here in America. And I just want to commend you to keep pushing forward on this. Seeing the slave trade in America is the most evil thing that we could ever have. And we desperately need the work that you're doing. And I was just thinking about that. Like this guy was writing that like 250 years ago. I mean, like that, it just keeps going back to the fact that like, yes, like people, and I say like, even like me, like, yes, like I'm waking up to this now or over the last few years, but like, this has been going on for hundreds of years. And you think about like, so if you're like a white person like me, like built into my fabric. So I forget which one of you said it. You talked about, Dexter, I think you said we fail to see systems. I wrote that down, but I also wrote down, so yes, we fail to see systems, just like fish don't see the water, but we're also a product of the systems we're in, and we can't deny that. We can't, like, and I guess what I'm thinking about is like, so for me, the system of the way America was built is, don't tell me what to do. It's my rights. It's my way. I deserve what I want, and I will take it. And if you infringe on that, then you're infringing on my personal freedom. And to this, I am still fighting to undo that in myself. Like everything in me wants to rebel. Everything in me wants to claim what is mine for my own sake.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because in large part of like, well, I mean, I'm in a culture for like for the last 250 years, like that's what America is. And like, I'm of the predominant majority, and that's like, so that's the ethos that I have. But you think about somebody in the Black community, and Timmy, I know that you're a first generation, American, but I'm sure you guys have had this, Dexter, maybe this speaks to you more, but like, so if you're part of a people group that was brought to the country forcibly, enslaved for the better part of 300 years. And then after that, there's Jim Crow laws, and you're seeing all this violence. Like, how does that form you? Like, I think that as a white community, we have to understand that like, we're part of a system, and like, and even like the people that are looting and rioting, like, it's like, it's not a surprise. Like it's because like, man, when you've dealt with this for 300 years, like, what are you going to do about it? That like, we just have to realize that, like I'm a product of the system. And if I can see the system, then all of a sudden I can become aware and I can do something.
Yeah. I think that people just need to recognize that, this system is not that old. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people think that all this stuff happened in the past, but it's just like, this stuff is fresh. You know what I mean? Like, like my mother and father-in-law remember when school started getting integrated. You know what I mean? In Portland. You know what I mean? And so it's just like, they were in school. And so I don't know, man. It's like, people just really need to know like what's going on. It's funny. There's this show, I won't say the full name, but it's called Black AF on Netflix. And Dexter, have you seen it?
It's great. I've been watched it.
It's funny because every episode is called something or because of slavery. It's part of like every title name of the episode. And it's just crazy to think about how much that aspect you see the effects of it today.
Yeah.
And I just feel like a lot of people don't recognize that enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, you make a good point about growing up in this system, right? Like we're all products of the system, and that includes Black Americans who've grown up here. I mean, I think we have incentives and more mechanisms along the way to see that system earlier and identify it, and we have a vested interest in acknowledging and breaking, trying to dismantle that system. But we're still, I mean, the media we still consume, you know, the movies we watch, the books we read, the education most of us are going to receive is still heavily influenced by white norms, right? And that means that, you know, as a product of slavery, Black people now have to unpack and dismantle the own slavery that we've internalized, right? Like insult to injury on top of this. And I've been working through several things. And that's why it's so frustrating when you have people who pull out the Candace Owenses, who actually, I don't even think that's internalized slavery. I think that's just, she's a sellout who wants to get a check, right? Like she knows what she's doing. But you have plenty of Black people, you know, I mean, 8% voted for Trump, right? Who have internalized these ideals, and they see the same issues, right? Well, if Black people just pulled up their pants, they wouldn't have issues. If they just had better fathers and stopped leaving their kids, you know, a mythical statistic, you know, a misleading statistic, you know, they wouldn't have these issues. If we stopped using the N-word, then of course, you know, like this respectability idea, and it's hard for me to hate them. I mean, I don't hate them because I realize, again, they're a product of the same system, and it's difficult to break out of that, right? But I also have to realize that if I'm ignoring all the majority of Black scholars, activists, and theologians and people who are doing this work and highlighting those one voices, I think Timmy mentioned this yesterday, if I bypass the first 11 and grab the 12th name, that's not doing justice to anybody, right? Like anyways, a lot to say that Black people also are working through these issues, and by and large, we've figured out a lot of it, but we still have plenty of blind spots because I mean, we're the fish not knowing we're in the water as well, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I want to respect your guys' time and thank you. Like, I can't tell you how much I respect both of you guys. And for me, like I keep a pretty low profile on social media, but what you guys post is, I mean, it's making a difference in my heart. It's making a difference in the way that I live, the way that I think. And I would just encourage you to keep talking. And I guess like, I'm just thinking too about like, just what does repentance look like for me? And I'll tell you, like, I'm sorry for like where I've contributed in the past towards like racial injustice and towards racism, implicit and explicit. And I think about like, even in this conversation, like the times where I didn't preface like the white church versus the church, like, it's so like, I'm steeped in it, and I'm trying to become aware of seeing the system. And I think that you guys are both voices that like, we need to listen to. And I just want to tell you thank you. Like I really appreciate it.
Timmy, I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Yeah, my son was running around, so I muted from it. I think Dexter hit it earlier. You know, like he said, like, you know, you have to recognize it, that you've been a part of it and that you've been complicit. And then, you know, you not only do you not just seek out relationships, but you get educated and you try to identify what those systemic issues are, and then do your job to dismantle it or interrupt it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And on top of that too, like one thing that I told my coworkers in the office is like, whenever you see or hear anything that robs the humanity of somebody else, you need to shut it down right there. You need to speak up and say something.
So I want to ask that. Okay. I want to ask this question to sign off then. Okay. So where's the line? Okay. So you see someone talking about systemic racism or right. Like I was in a job interview a year ago when this multimillionaire that owns the company is telling me, he just goes on this rant about how white privilege doesn't exist because he had to work for what he had. And, you know, and I'm in a job interview. So like, I just listened, but I ended up turning the job down and like not, and I mean, there's a lot of but like that was a factor in it, you know, like I don't want to work for this guy. Where's the line where we need to step in and actually make a big deal and risk a friendship over it?
Honestly, I think you have to be pretty excessive, honestly, because I think there's so many nuances that, you know, a trickling stream turns into a huge canyon after a while. You know what I mean? I'm even saying, like, if you hear any type of joke that might be referring to, like, that's a negative stereotype, you need to call that stuff out and challenge someone and really ask them, why are you saying that? And what do you really believe? Because that's what's being taught to kids. That's what gets that stuff started. You know what I mean? Like, I bet Dexter, the first time you experienced racism was when you were a child.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And it wasn't by an adult, it was by other kids. And it starts with those kind of jokes. You know, it's just like, I just think that you have to really call it out when you see it. Like, if someone makes, like the other day, I remember one time at work, you know, someone was making a joke about a stereotype Asian driver. You can't do that, bro. Like, stop. You know, call them out on it. Make them feel uncomfortable about their jokes or their thing. You know, you just can't let that stuff slide.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, shoot, just 2 days ago, and Timmy knows what I'm talking about, we had someone drop the N-word in a comment, right? And just casually, there's nothing wrong with the word. I mean, Timmy called him out, and you know, we've taken steps, but just like, this stuff goes on all the time, right? So what does it look like to interrupt? I mean, there's a concept called bystander intervention, right? So it's hard for the person who is the subject of the abuse or the discrimination to stop it, right? So if you're a bystander, that's when you intervene. That's when you have the most impact. And I would say, I mean, kind of the analysis to go through is, you know, is this unsafe or is this just uncomfortable, right? Because if it's unsafe, then that's a different. There's reasons to pause, right? And typically for people of color, you know, Black people, it can be unsafe, right? Like, for me correcting my boss, you know, in the middle of a board meeting, that's my job, right? For a white person, it may not be the same. They can laugh that off and be okay, right? It's often just uncomfortable. I think about Jeremy Christensen and the girls on the Max, right? The Max stabber, right? That was unsafe for someone to get involved, but the alternative was, you know, two girls getting stabbed, right? I think that's noteworthy and applaudable. I'm not asking white people to regularly step in front of a knife, right? If you do it, thank you, I appreciate it. But that's what unsafe looks like, right? Oftentimes we're just talking about uncomfortable, and I can't feel bad for you if I'm asking you to be uncomfortable to help end racism and create an environment that's inclusive for everyone, right?
Yeah. So it's like, for example, there was a situation at work. I was sitting at work, right? And, you know, a guy who actually hired me, you know, all of our tables are whiteboard tables. We're just sitting down talking in a meeting, and he writes the word thug and then points an arrow to me. You know what I mean? And so, like, this is my boss. And so, like, am I going to be like, yo, bro, I probably should have back then been like, yo, that's not cool. You shouldn't have done that. You know, later on, one of my buddies who was there and saw it, he's like, yo, man, I'm sorry. I should have stepped in and said something. You know, one of my white coworkers. And like, and here's another example too. And I don't want to I don't want to talk too long, but like, I remember back in the day, we were watching a football game. It was like JV, we're seniors, so we're watching these JV players play a game. There's a bee on a dude's back, and I hit the bee because it was about to sting him, and the dude was mad that I slapped him in the back, right? And this kid is like, oh, where'd you learn that? Did you learn that in the jungle? You know what I mean? And they're like, ah. And the thing that was crazy is that there was a teacher there, and when the boys walked by, she's like, wow, that's messed up. I'm like, you could have said something. You know what I mean? Like, you were right there. Like, that was an opportunity for her to step up and be like, hey, like, don't do that. That's not right. Like, chastise, not necessarily like antagonize people, but like, you know, you have to call people out for that kind of stuff, man. Like, you can't let that stuff slide.
Yeah. And I mean, I know we're talking a lot, right? You keep trying to let us go, and we keep bringing up more stuff.
I got all the time in the world. That's all right.
Well, I'm good. My wife is not calling me downstairs yet, but I would say there's the strategy in even how you correct someone and how you approach them, right? A question I get asked a lot is, well, what do I do about my racist family members, right? Like, do I just cut them off? You know, how do I respond to that? You know, do we have these awkward Thanksgivings? And I mean, I think you have to really, like, it's a case by case situation, right?
Yeah.
I think the overarching goal should be make sure that you're not normalizing racism, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're too passive and you're too quiet, like, oh, my uncle's just racist, you know, that he's old, that's how he always is. Now you're
Yeah.
normalizing it, right? You're allowing him to inflict those views on harmful populations, or on populations that are more vulnerable populations. And so maybe the way to approach that isn't you're playing a long game, and so you're going to call him out passively over time and hope something changes. I don't think that's very effective, but I've used that with my own mother, right? So like I get that. And maybe it's, you have to call them out directly and aggressively and make clear that, look, we can't have a relationship if this is going to go on, right? And there's nothing wrong with severing ties with people who continue to be racist and are unrepentant racists. And I don't just mean people who are the outright Klan members, but people who continue to make these jokes or continue to support policies that lead to the dehumanization of Black and brown people, right?
Yeah.
I'm at the point now where I don't think I can have a realistic, meaningful relationship with someone who continues to support Trump. And this isn't about just being politically different or being a conservative, but you see what he stands for, you see what he's pushing for, you see the harm that's resulting from that. And what you're saying is, well, issue of abortion is still bigger to me, or well, my tax refund is still better to me. Black lives I can sacrifice them at the altar for these things. And we have a moral disagreement. Like, we can't go further. I hope some well-meaning white people will come and talk to you and get you out of that, but I can't invest in that any longer. And it's just not healthy for me. It's not the environment for me. And so I'm cutting ties, right? And I think sometimes you have to deal with your racist family members and friends that way. Like, ties will have to get cut. And the same way that you would cut ties if you found out that they were a child molester or they were an ongoing animal abuser, right? Like, these are equally harmful. We just downplay the importance of racism.
It's funny. I'm sure that you guys have stories about like situations you've been in where you've experienced racism. Thinking about it on the opposite end, I mean, I can think clearly of like 5 to 6 times of the last number of years where like blatant use of the N-word or just like super inappropriate impression of a stereotype and like these different things, and I even think about like I had a team member that worked underneath me, and we were talking about we were at lunch one day talking, and he was from the South, and I made a comment about one of the shootings that had happened, and he just went off about like, well, you guys got to realize that like, most of the Black people out there, they just don't want to work, and if they would just do these things, and I was just like, dude, like, that's super racist to say that, like, that's not true, and like that's wrong. And he's like, well, no, but like, you haven't lived there. I mean, I know that there's plenty of like good Black people up here, but like down there, there's just so, and like for me, it was a moment where, like, I just said like, dude, like, we just like, that's just wrong. Like, you can't do that. Like that's, and it was uncomfortable to have that conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you did.
But the thing I think about is like, I think that like for white people, we want to whitewash things and just say, oh, like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it just doesn't. But I mean, like, I can think of multiple times of the last 10 years where like, like I've been a part of these conversations, or like even like I've told racist jokes because they were funny, or, like I hear someone say the N-word or something and I don't say anything about it. Like, it's like, you see both ends of the spectrum where I think white people can look back and see these things that have happened. And then there's all kinds of Black people that have had these experiences actually happening to them. And for the white community to just deny it and say, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. When we've all lived it on different sides of the fence, I think that no one can deny that.
The thing is, man, like, if someone, and this is a really, like, this is ugly things that actually happen. Like, if someone were to experience a rape, the worst thing you could tell them that it's not a big deal or that they're lying about it. That does more harm sometimes than the rape itself. You know what I mean? And so it's just like, and I obviously I can't speak to those people because like I've never experienced it myself, but like, from what I've read, like sometimes that stuff does more to you mentally because it affects how you view yourself and it invalidates the pain that you experience. You know what I mean? And so it's just, I don't know. I think, and even that guy that you confronted, Tim, like that guy probably doesn't think he's a racist.
No, he doesn't. Like that was the whole thing in the conversation is, yeah.
And so I don't know. It's just, yeah, I hate it when people try to diminish and try to explain like, hey, like it's not that big of a deal. I don't know what it is, but the cloud of racism just makes some people so uncomfortable that they just try to refuse that it exists.
Yeah. And racism is not, it's not a state of being, right? Like there are people who are just continuously racist, but you make decisions and you uphold views and policies that are racist and you're acting racist, but you can equally make decisions and work to undermine those policies that are anti-racist, right? So we talk about that guy, and in shorthand, we describe him as, yes, he was a racist, but accurately what we should say is he was espousing racist views. He can just as easily be taught to espouse anti-racist views, right? And so, and if white people do a better job of understanding that, we're not saying this is a character flaw or an inherent character trait that you need to be defensive about it. This is a bad decision or a bad view you're holding. Now let's correct that, right? And so it's not, you don't need to be defensive, just receive the criticism, understand it, and be like, okay, well, how do I act anti-racist? And Ibram Kendi talks about this really well in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? Like, it's not a fixed point in time. You know, there are things that I do that are upholding, that are racist, or holding racist views. And I'm sure there are sexist views that I uphold. And there are times when I'm actively working against that, right? And so how do I get more in my life where I'm continuously working towards the anti-racist views? I'll still slip up and fall back to racist. Yeah. You know, I'll still slip up and fall back to sexist. But how do I make sure more of my decisions are anti-racist? And I think if we can communicate that better, ideally people will lower their guards a little bit more, right? Like it was a decision you made or it's a policy you supported. It's not a character trait. So.
Yeah, I think about that for myself a lot. Like the older that I get, and part of it I think is just being more aware of your sin, you know. But the older that I get, the more I see just inherent in myself, like racist biases and stereotypes and things, and sexist. Like, dude, we haven't talked about sexism, but like, oh my gosh, like, dude, I have been such a part of the problem, right? And like, you know, anyway, I think that, again, this is a conversation like for Jesus followers, like we got to realize that we're not right about everything, and that there are weak points in our point of view, and we'd be really wise to listen to other Jesus followers that have different experiences than us and learn from them. Because I guess at the end of the day, we have to ask the question, like, I like a lot of my life is anchored around the story of Revelation chapters 13 and 14 about the beast and the people of God. And I think the narrative is so true of like every empire of the world, that like there's coercion and deceit from the empire that leads people astray. And if you rise against it, the beast conquers you. It's just what happens. And that in Revelation 14, it's all about like the people of God. And it says that they follow the Lamb wherever he goes. And there's this kind of counter narrative going on where in Revelation 13, in the beast narrative, the beast is conquering the people of God. But if you jump to chapter 15, it actually talks about how it's the people of God that conquered the beast. And there's this reality going on that it's as the people of God stand up and are quote unquote conquered, as they lay down their lives for the sake of others, that is them conquering the beast. And ultimately that is what we're called to do if we're going to follow the Lamb wherever he goes.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, thank you. I really appreciate this. I feel like I don't hang out with you face to face nearly as much as I should, but I want to tell you that I appreciate you. And you guys have voices that people are listening to. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. Yeah. Thank you for being willing to be uncomfortable. So.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, peace guys. You have a good day.
Take it easy.
All right. See ya.
All right. Take it.